Don't take your pills tonight. That is what Tomas whispered to me as I was walking back from the mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon in April. He didn't stop walking. He didn't look at me. He just passed by with the wheelbarrow full of mulch and said those 7 words under his breath like a man who knew he could lose everything for saying them. I stood there in the driveway of my own home in Savannah, Georgia, holding a stack of junk mail and a water bill, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. Tomas had worked my property for 11 years. He pruned the magnolias. He kept the azaleas alive through the drought of 2019. He barely spoke English when he started, but his hands knew soil the way mine knew blueprints. He was not the kind of man who said things he did not mean. I looked down at the pill organizer in my shirt pocket, the little plastic case my daughter had filled for me that morning, sorting my medications with a cheerful efficiency that I had mistaken for love. I did not take the evening dose. Instead, I walked around to the back of the house, sat down on the iron bench near the fountain that my late wife Diane had picked out 20 years ago, and I called Tomas on his cell phone. He answered on the first ring. His voice was tight, almost a whisper. He said he had seen something 2 nights ago. He had come back after hours to fix a broken sprinkler head near the kitchen window. The lights were on inside, and through the gap in the curtains, he saw my daughter Cecilia and her husband Drake standing at the kitchen counter. Drake was grinding something with a mortar and pestle. Cecilia was emptying my prescription bottles and refilling them with whatever Drake had crushed into powder. Tomas said he watched for 3 minutes. He said Cecilia was laughing. She told Drake that Dr. Benton had promised no autopsy would be necessary for a man my age with a documented history of congestive heart failure. Tomas said he was sorry he did not come to me sooner. He said he was afraid they would have him deported. I told him he had nothing to be afraid of. I told him to keep working as if nothing had changed. And then I sat on that bench for a long time, watching the sun go down behind the live oaks, feeling something cold and heavy settle into my chest that had nothing to do with my heart condition. My name does not matter. What matters is that I am 67 years old, and until that Tuesday, I believed my daughter was the last good thing in my life. I built Callaway and Associates from a 2-man drafting office into one of the largest architectural firms in the Southeast. I designed courthouses, hospitals, the Performing Arts Center downtown that bears Diane's name. When Diane died 3 years ago from pancreatic cancer, I sold the firm and retired to our home on Whitfield Lane with its wraparound porch and her rose garden. I had money, more money than I knew what to do with. The house was paid off. The portfolio was strong. The life insurance payout from Diane's policy sat in a trust that was supposed to go to Cecilia and her children someday. That was the plan. The plan assumed my daughter was human. Cecilia moved back in 8 months ago. She said it was because she was worried about me living alone. She said Drake had lost his job at the pharmaceutical company in Charlotte and they needed to regroup. She said it would be temporary. She brought casseroles. She organized my medications. She hired Dr. Fenton as my new primary care physician after my old doctor retired. She was so attentive, so present, so unlike the distant, sulking woman she had been for most of her 30s. I was grateful. I was a fool. The symptoms had started about 6 months ago. Dizziness that came in waves, a persistent metallic taste that I blamed on my blood pressure medication. Tremors in my hands that made it hard to hold the coffee cup. Confusion that crept in during the afternoons, making me forget where I put my keys or what day of the week it was. Dr. Fenton told me it was the early stages of vascular dementia. He told Cecilia, right in front of me, that she should consider taking power of attorney. He said the decline would be rapid. He said it with such practiced sympathy that I believed him. I believed all of it because it came from people I trusted, and because when you are 67 and alone, the story that your body is failing you is easier to accept than the story that your family is killing you. After Tomas warned me, I did not sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the house settle around me. Down the hall, Cecilia and Drake were in the guest room that used to be her childhood bedroom, the room where I had read her stories about princesses and dragons. the room where she had cried on my shoulder after her first heartbreak in high school. Now she was sleeping peacefully, dreaming about the day I would stop breathing. The next morning, I told Cecilia I was going to the hardware store. Instead, I drove 40 miles to a walk-in clinic in Statesboro where nobody knew my name. I paid cash. I used a fake name. I asked for a full blood panel and a toxicology screen. The doctor, a young woman who looked barely old enough to have finished residency, ran the tests without asking many questions. When the results came back 2 hours later, she sat me down in her office and closed the door. She told me my blood contained dangerously elevated levels of digoxin, a cardiac medication I had never been prescribed. She said there were also traces of a compound consistent with colchicine, which in small repeated doses could cause the exact symptoms I had been experiencing: confusion, tremors, nausea, muscle weakness. She said the combination was designed to mimic the progression of heart failure in a man with my medical history. She said I needed to go to a hospital immediately. I thanked her. I paid her in cash. I asked her for something to counteract the toxins. She hesitated, but she wrote the prescription. I filled it at a pharmacy 2 towns over and swallowed the first pill in the parking lot. It tasted like iron and chalk. It tasted like the beginning of the rest of my life. I did not go to the police. I had spent 40 years in a profession where precision mattered, where you did not pour the foundation until every beam and joist was accounted for in the drawings. If I called the police now, Cecilia would deny everything. Drake would flush the evidence. Dr. Fenton would testify that I was a confused old man with dementia. They would walk, and they would try again, and the next time Tomas would not be there to save me. No, I was going to build something, a structure so airtight, so meticulously engineered that when it came down on their heads, there would be no escape hatch. I checked into the Bohemian Hotel on the riverfront under the name of a dormant LLC I had kept active since the 90s. I sat on the balcony watching the container ships move down the Savannah River, and I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Irving Polk, my attorney for 30 years, the man who had drafted every contract, every trust, every prenuptial agreement in my professional life. Irving was 72 and still sharper than any lawyer half his age. He answered with a grunt and asked me why I was calling him on a Wednesday night. I told him my daughter was poisoning me. The line went silent for 10 seconds. Then Irving said he would be at the hotel in an hour and to have coffee ready. He arrived in 45 minutes. He read the toxicology report. He watched the footage from the security camera I had installed in the kitchen 2 years ago after a break-in scare, the camera that Cecilia did not know about. The footage showed exactly what Tomas had described. Drake grinding pills. Cecilia refilling my prescription bottles. The timestamp was clear. Their faces were clear. Irving sat back in his chair and took off his glasses. He said we should call the district attorney. I said no. Irving looked at me the way he always looked at me when I was about to do something reckless. He asked me what I wanted. I told him I wanted the same thing I wanted when a competitor tried to undercut my bid on the federal courthouse in 2003. I wanted to let them think they had won. I wanted to let them overextend. And then I wanted to pull the blueprint out from under them and watch the whole thing collapse. Irving smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent 3 decades in contract law and had been waiting his entire career for a case this interesting. We worked through the night. First, we restructured the trust. The $12 million that Cecilia expected to inherit was quietly redirected into the Diane Whitmore Foundation, a charitable trust I had set up in my wife's maiden name. The foundation would fund scholarships for first-generation college students. Every penny that Cecilia thought was hers was now legally and irrevocably committed to educating strangers. The transfer would not show up in public records for 72 hours. Second, we created the bait. I owned a piece of commercial property on Broughton Street that I had been holding for years. It was worth about $4 million. I drafted a fake letter from a developer offering to buy it for $19 million, contingent on my signature and a clean title transfer. I saved the letter as a PDF on my iPad, the one I always left on the kitchen table. The one Cecilia checked every morning when she thought I was still asleep. Third, I called a man I had not spoken to in 5 years. Dr. Smine. Navarro was a toxicologist at Emory who owed me a favor from the time I redesigned the research wing of his department pro bono. I drove to Atlanta that night. He confirmed the poisoning, documented everything with clinical precision, and agreed to serve as an expert witness when the time came. He also started me on a proper detoxification protocol. He warned me it would feel like the worst flu of my life. I told him I had survived worse. I drove back to Savannah the next morning. I parked a block from the house and walked in through the side gate. I shuffled my feet. I let my hands shake. I called Cecilia by her mother's name, pretending to be confused. She corrected me gently, her voice dripping with patience, and handed me my morning tea. I drank it, every drop, because I had already taken the antidote an hour earlier, and because I needed her to believe the timeline was still on track. I needed her to think I was fading. I sat in the living room and let my head droop. I mumbled about the magnolias needing pruning. I asked what year it was. Cecilia looked at Drake over my head and nodded slightly. I saw the nod reflected in the mirror above the fireplace. It was the nod of a woman confirming that her father was almost dead. 3 days later, the trap sprung exactly as I had designed it. Cecilia found the letter on my iPad. I know, because I watched her find it through the kitchen camera feed on my laptop at the hotel. Her eyes went wide. She called Drake into the room. They read it together, their heads bent close, whispering like thieves planning a heist, which is exactly what they were. $19 million. Drake kept saying the number like a prayer. He said they needed to sign the deal before I died, or the property would get tangled in probate. Cecilia said they already had the power of attorney that Dr. Fenton had helped her obtain. They just needed to forge my signature on the title transfer and file it with the county before anyone noticed. They did not know that the power of attorney was worthless. Irving had filed a motion to revoke it 2 days earlier, citing my toxicology results as evidence of undue influence. The revocation was sealed by the court, invisible to anyone who was not looking for it. They did not know that the property on Bruton Street had been donated to the city of Savannah that morning for use as a community arts center. The deed was already filed. The property was no longer mine to sell, which meant any transaction they attempted would constitute fraud. And they did not know that Irving had contacted the FBI's Elder Abuse Task Force and that an agent named Russo had been building a case file for 72 hours. On Saturday night, Cecilia and Drake hosted a dinner party at my house. My house. They called it a celebration of my legacy. They invited my former business partners, the neighbors, the people from the country club. They told everyone I was too ill to attend, that I was resting upstairs, that the dementia had progressed rapidly. Drake wore my late wife's favorite cufflinks, the ones Diane had given me on our 25th anniversary. Gold, with a small sapphire in each one. Because sapphire was her birthstone. I saw them on his wrist through the camera feed, and something inside me went very quiet and very cold. I arrived at 8:15. I did not use the front door. I walked in through the garden, past the roses Diane had planted, past the fountain where I had proposed to her in 1984. I entered through the French doors into the dining room where 18 people were seated around my table, eating my food, drinking my wine, listening to my daughter give a speech about what a wonderful but tragically declining man her father was. The room went silent when they saw me. I was not shuffling. I was not confused. I was wearing the navy suit I had worn to Diane's funeral, and my back was straight, and my eyes were clear. Cecilia dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor Diane had picked out. Red wine spread across the oak like a blood stain. "Dad," she said, her voice cracked on the word. "You should be in bed. You are not well." I walked to the head of the table. My seat. The seat Drake had been sitting in. He stood up quickly, nearly knocking over the candelabra. His face was the color of wet cement. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply placed the toxicology report on the table next to the bread basket. Then I placed the printed screenshots of the kitchen camera footage beside it. Then I placed the revocation of the power of attorney. Then I placed the deed transfer showing the Broughton Street property now belonged to the city of Savannah. I let them look. I let the guests look. I let the silence do the work. Cecilia started to cry. She reached for my hand. "Dad, this is a misunderstanding." "Drake made me do it," he said. "It was just supplements. I did not know what was in the pills." I looked at her. I looked at the face that was so much like her mother's. The same brown eyes, the same stubborn chin, and I felt nothing. That was the worst part. Not anger, not sadness. Just an absence where love used to be. I pulled my hand away. I reached into my jacket pocket and took out my phone. I pressed play on a video file. The sound filled the room through the phone's speaker, tinny but unmistakable. It was Cecilia's voice, recorded 3 nights ago through the kitchen camera. She was telling Drake that Dr. Tornizist, Benton, had guaranteed no autopsy. She was laughing. She was saying that by the end of the month, they would be in Costa Rica with enough money to never come back. She was saying that the old man would not even know what hit him. The room erupted. Someone gasped. Someone pushed back from the table. My neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Abigail, put her hand over her mouth and started to cry. Cecilia looked at me with something that was not remorse. It was fury. The fury of a person who has been caught, not a person who is sorry. "You were supposed to be too sick to figure this out," she said. Her voice was low, shaking, stripped of all pretense. "You were supposed to just die quietly and let us have what we deserved." "What you deserved," I repeated. I let the words hang in the air. Then I looked past her, toward the front door, where the red and blue lights were already flashing to the sidelights. Agent Russo walked in with 3 other agents. He was calm, professional, and carried the arrest warrants like they weighed nothing at all. Cecilia screamed when they put the cuffs on her. She screamed my name over and over, the way she used to scream it when she was 5 years old and afraid of the dark. But she was not 5 anymore, and the darkness she was afraid of now was entirely of her own making. Drake did not scream. He went limp. He looked at me as the agents walked him past, and he said something I will never forget. He said, "She told me you would never find out. She said you were too old and too stupid." I stared at him until the door closed behind him. The dinner guests left in stunned silence. One by one, they filed out, unable to look me in the eye, unsure if they were embarrassed for me or for themselves for not seeing it sooner. I did not blame them. I had not seen it either. Not until a quiet man with dirt under his fingernails risked everything to tell me the truth. Irving stayed. He poured me a glass of bourbon and sat across from me at the now empty table. He asked if I was okay. I told him the truth. I said I was not okay and that I did not expect to be okay for a long time. But I said I was alive, and that was something. Dr. Fenton was arrested the following Tuesday. His medical records showed a pattern of falsified diagnoses for elderly patients who had family members seeking power of attorney. He had done this before. Cecilia and Drake were not his first clients. They were just the ones who got caught. That was a year ago. I live alone now in a smaller house near Forsyth Park. It has a garden, but I do not tend it myself. Tomas does. He comes 3 times a week, and his daughter Lena, who just started high school, comes with him on Saturdays to study on my porch. I am paying for her tuition at a private school downtown. She wants to be an engineer. She reminds me of myself at that age, hungry and precise and full of plans. Cecilia is serving 12 years at a federal facility in Tallahassee. Drake got 15 because the prosecution proved he had sourced the compounds through his old pharmaceutical contacts. Dr. Fenton lost his medical license and is awaiting trial on 6 additional counts of elder abuse involving other patients. I received a letter from Cecilia last month. It was 4 pages long. She said she was sorry. She said she missed me. She said she had found God in prison and wanted my forgiveness. I read it twice, then I folded it and put it in the drawer of my desk, next to the toxicology report and the photos from her 5th birthday party where she is sitting on my shoulders, laughing, reaching for the sky. I do not know if I will write back. I do not know if forgiveness is something I have left to give, but I know this. The most expensive lesson I ever learned was not taught to me in any classroom or boardroom. It was taught to me at my own kitchen table by a daughter who decided my life was less valuable than a real estate deal. People say blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything. But I have learned that family is not a birthright. It is a choice, made every single day, in small acts of kindness and loyalty that most people never notice until they are gone. Tomas chose to warn me. Lena chooses to sit on my porch and show me her calculus homework. Abigail from next door chooses to bring me peach cobbler on Sundays and sit with me while we watch the birds. They are my family now, not because of blood, but because of trust. And trust, once you have seen it betrayed, becomes the most precious thing in the world. More precious than money, more precious than property, more precious than anything a daughter can inherit or a son-in-law can steal. If you have ever had to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to protect you, I understand. Tell me your story in the comments. Let me know where you are watching from. And please, if this resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep this community strong. Take care of yourselves. Watch your back. And never ever let anyone tell you that loyalty is something you owe to people who are actively trying to destroy you. You owe it only to those who have earned it. Good night.